Today we're going to be talking about super choppy sabers. Big choppy sabers. If you guys have been in the HEMA scene long enough, you'll know what a 1796 light cavalry saber is. It is a very uniquely broad, choppy looking saber that for some reason everybody wants, including myself. Well, I finally have my hands on a Windlass 1796 light cavalry saber, and I'm not disappointed. So we're gonna do a full review on this today and do some test cutting and see how a soldier of that time might have used a blade like this. Now, before I get into the history of this imposing looking blade, let's see how it feels, because I've actually not had a whole lot of experience swinging one around, and it is less front heavy than I thought it'd be. So this is a reproduction made by Windlass, and if I'm not mistaken, when Matt Easton did his review of this sword, he basically said it was a carbon copy of the original. It was pretty much a reproduction of the original one-to-one. So if it felt like this is a lot less forward heavy than I thought it'd be, because I mean, you have that big hatchet tip right here. I have to be careful because the back edge is sharpened. But this hatchet tip, as opposed to many other saber designs, I'm sure Dalton over here could post some pictures of like an 1821 or something like that. Most other sabers have a smaller profile right here, and they go to like a more acute tip, and that's gonna be for thrusting. That's gonna be to get the tip into the target, especially like heavy clothing. I don't know how well this one would do. I've heard of accounts where this did not do as well with stabbing into heavy clothing, but the choppiness, it's like the right amount of cutting power, but the right amount of agility. And I'm assuming there's some good distal tape, or we'll get the calipers out in a little bit. But it's just a ferocious looking blade. Look at the curve of that blade. So if I were to parry an attack from up here, and then instead of chopping down at the last second, I flip in and thrust, there's enough curve to that blade that if I put my arm high enough, it would definitely go around. So that's pretty cool. I started studying saber about a year ago, and we derive most of our techniques from Roworth, and that is a combination of saber and many other weapons like the Highland broadsword. So Roworth, and my understanding of why this saber was designed, it was designed to be able to be put in the hands of the common soldier with minimal training, which is a common tactic of modern militaries, right? You don't have 30 years to learn how to duel with a saber, so if you're gonna grab some poor boy off the farm to be a mounted soldier of some kind, you had to be able to teach him sword work in a relatively short amount of time, and that is why the 1796 was, one of the reasons why the 1796 was created. It was to be able to give gross motor skill techniques to a new soldier and actually have him be effective on the battlefield. Before that, if you look at sabers from the, I think it was 1788, they looked completely different from this. They looked a lot different from this, and even sabers after swords like this were very different. But the 1788 had a much more slender profile. It was just understood that you were probably going to learn a lot of fencing as a young man, and you would be taking that into your service with the military. Once they started bringing people who weren't from military stock to join the military, such as light cavalrymen, they needed a weapon that you could put in someone's hand, give them the minimum amount of training needed, and they would still be effective at cleaving the target. And guess what? Cutting just is a little bit easier to do than trying to get your point online every single time. I would say that this sword is not designed for dueling. This is not a traditional, if you want to call it a HEMA saber. This is definitely a battlefield saber. It's designed for somebody on horseback. It can be used by somebody on foot, and I can even feel it. Like, it's not as light as other sabers I've messed with. And I can feel that it's a little harder to stop than a spear point saber, but it's almost like doing two jobs at once. This makes an adequate light cavalry saber, something on horseback, but it's also okay if I put it in the hands of somebody on foot. And that's in opposition to something like a heavy cavalry saber, which is gonna have a broader blade, most likely gonna have way less flex in the blade, because you have, of course, the horse driving that sword through targets instead of it being a combination foot soldier and cavalry weapon. Point of balance is actually a little further up than I thought it'd be. This is that 6 inches? What do you think? It's about 6 inches, right? Let me see if I can get it to balance, right there. 6 inches from the guard, which makes sense for a choppier blade, right? This sword is designed for slashing and cutting. It's not meant for super lively thrusts where you're gonna be able to throw the tip in and then be able to retract. I would say that the point of balance kind of illustrates what this sword's supposed to do. It's a sweepy sword, boom, boom, boom. I'm chopping, boom. If I'm on horseback, I'm sweep cutting. I mean, I've never done horseback swordsmanship, so maybe somebody in the comments tell me if I'm doing it wrong, tell me how they would use it back in the day, but I just imagine that having the sword loaded and being able to essentially mow the grass and then come back up, mow the grass, come back up, that makes sense for a sword like this. I don't see myself using it forward a whole lot and stabbing and then running through and then reloading and doing that. It just doesn't feel right for it. And the tip doesn't look right for it, to be honest. I would use a spadroon or something, saber with a much more acute tip to thrust forward, let the person pass, thrust forward, let the person pass. This one, my instinct is to just chop something off, reload, chop something off, reload, and keep going, boom, boom. But the sharpened false edge tells me a lot about other ways this sword might be using, because I'm not using a false edge at all on horseback. I can't imagine trying to do this, right? This is something that I think if I was fighting somebody else with a sword or a polearm or other melee weapon, that I would block and then maybe come on over and chop to the back of the head or the arm. So Dalton and I had a little debate about what this sword is made out of. He said, probably not 1080. He actually said not 1080 because he thought it wouldn't flex. I said probably EN45, and I thought it was EN45. I said in the video it's EN45. It's not. It is in fact 1080. 1080. This is 1080 high carbon steel, high carbon spring steel.
Bullshit.
Sorry, Dalton. You now go get to die. Go to the other room and die.
Finally.
The blade has good flex, flexing at about 1/3, and if you notice, the bottom half isn't flexing at all. And that's exactly what we want. The stirrup style hilt is covered in leather, it seems, with a texturing below it. And I'm guessing that's wood. Obviously, I'm not gonna pull this thing apart to find out, but it feels like wood steps under formed leather, which makes it extremely comfortable. And the palm swell feels good in the hand. I don't feel like this blade is too small or the hilt is too small, because if the hilt were too small, a blade of this weight would honestly feel extremely uncomfortable. And if we take a look at where the ricasso is, you're gonna see this leather washer right there, which is also pretty common on service sabers, British service sabers. And I honestly think that this hilt design is just iconic. Everybody sees this. You don't even have to see this part of the blade. You can just see this, and everyone immediately goes, 1796, 1796, and they know. But there are other blade styles that have the stirrup style hilt, not even just from England, I think. I think there's other countries that were using the same kind. But as soon as you see that hatchet tip, you know what it's about. You know what this sword is. And very strange phenomenon is everyone loves this sword. Everyone does. Everyone in HEMA, when they think saber, a lot of times they're thinking of a 1796, and I think it's because it almost looks falchiony. It looks messery, falchiony with a big curve, as opposed to other Renaissance or later era sabers, which are very reminiscent of maybe the Civil War and those types of styles. Definitely geared a little more towards battlefield and dueling. This, I don't think would be fast enough for dueling. This is definitely something that I'm cutting through a thick wool coat with, I'm cutting through some form of armor with. I'm winding up for cuts like this a lot slower than if I were to do small motions with the thrust and a lot of fancy footwork. Now, Roworth Techniques, I think, make a lot more sense to me now that I've been instructed in it. They're all very simple and very direct. There isn't a whole lot of flow that you might see in other saber techniques, especially from the East. Everything is stay within the body box and chop the other person's arm off. And I can see why some of the artwork that we find that shows both broadsword and sabers being used with these techniques are cleaving guys' skulls in half, because look at that hatchet tip. The same way that it would be with a Highland broadsword, it's just a ferociously choppy sword. I feel like this would go through a heavy wool hat, no problem. Maybe even some lightly armored helmets. I can see it just chopping straight through. And absolutely ruining a soldier's day. Another unique fun fact about the 1796 is it was one of the first times that swords were industrialized on a standard, because the 1788 and sabers prior to that, there were many different units that received different variations of those sabers. So you could go to one unit and they would have a blade shape that looked one way, and you could go to another unit and it would be a blade shape that's another way, but they were both considered to be 1788 style sabers. The 1796 pretty much were all made very similarly. They had different variations, like you had the clip point version, you had the heavy cavalry version, and of course have the light cavalry version with the hatchet tip. But for the most part, they were all manufactured to a singular standard. And because of that, the performance of these swords was able to be recorded pretty consistently. The windlass model comes with a steel scabbard, and it does not look like it's wood-lined. Nope, it is not wood-lined, which was historical. Metal scabbards existed. There were models that had wood lining from what I understand, but it was most likely by special request. The problem I have with complete steel scabbards is eventually it's gonna dull your blade. And we did see that historically as well with every kind of saber that had a purely steel scabbard. But why were they using steel instead of purely wood? My understanding is because this is a cavalry saber. This is a saber that goes on you with the horse. You're gonna get it banged up. It's gonna be moving, it's gonna be banging on the trees, and a wood scabbard is going to break after a while. So, and it is much easier to manufacture something out of one material, such as steel, than having to make it a laminate with wood on the inside. It's also more expensive to make it with wood. However, people started realizing that their blades were getting super dull from scraping these on the inside of the scabbards, so a lot of them, I wouldn't say a lot of them, some of them eventually got wood lining. Now, I don't know if that was the case for the 1796. Were there ever any examples of the 1796 with wood? I don't know. I know that there are other saber examples where we see the standard model that just has a purely steel scabbard, and then you see other models which I'm sure were custom ordered by the soldier themselves or the unit. They have wood lining, and honestly, if I had my choice, I want a wood line. I want my sword to stay as sharp as possible. If I was on horseback, maybe it doesn't have to be that sharp. It doesn't have to be crazy sharp, because as you're riding through, you're cutting somebody with the power of the horse, with horsepower. And if I was on foot, if I was a foot soldier, I would want this thing to be as razor sharp as possible without chipping the edge, because this is my lifeline. If I don't have any other, if my musket is out of ammo, I don't have a pistol, this is my last lifeline. I want to make sure that when I cut through something like a thick wool coat, the edge is actually going to cut through it, and I'm not going to be sitting there trying to bludgeon another soldier to death. Hand protection is what you would expect from a stirrup style handguard. It is a single plane hand protection, meaning there's nothing in a three-dimensional space around my hands that's going to protect me, so it's going to have nowhere near the hand protection of, say, a Highland basket hilt or even a 3-bar saber. I'm not sure why at this point they decided to go with the single slab. Maybe it's a hand mobility, but later down the line we do see them going to the 3-bar hilt system. If you look at models of the 1788, a lot of them had basket style hilts that would go all the way around the hand. So it might have also been a cost thing. If it takes more artistry and time to craft a basket hilt on a sword, you're gonna get less swords into the hands of soldiers, right? Something like this is a bent piece of steel. Machines were starting to make a lot of this, right? It wasn't an artisan hand bending and hand crafting everything. The blade comes with a secondary bevel that you can see pretty profoundly. I'm usually not a fan of secondary bevels, but this is probably historically accurate to what you find. You would probably find a mixture of single edge geometry of people that took the time to sharpen a single edge down, and then people that just needed their weapon sharpened for war. And I don't know if the Old English tradition of keeping swords dull and then sharpening them in wartime was a part of the 1796 era, but I know that there are many cases where fully tempered and battle-ready swords were kept unsharpened. And then when wartime came about, or when you were going on campaign, you would then get it sharpened by a smith, and it really depended on the smith if you were going to get a secondary bevel, if they had the tools or the time to create a single bevel with stones, or if you had the money to get it done. We all know that single bevels, single edge geometries cut better than anything with a secondary bevel, but a secondary bevel is still going to get the job done, especially for a conscript or a soldier that was just freshly put into the cavalry, and you just need the sword to do a job. I can't really tell you how sharp it came out of the box because we've already cut with this thing quite a bit, but I'm going to show you how sharp it is now. Yeah. It's a little teary. No, I got it. It's also very awkward to hold the paper and cut with the sword at the same time. Okay, it's having trouble. The thing is, it doesn't feel dull. It's like starting to cut. Okay, there we go. I can tell where this thing has been cutting, right around here at the point of percussion. So you can tell that's the dullest part of the blade. Oops. There we go. Maybe it's just me. Yeah. One more time. There we go. All right, so right around here, this part of the blade is the sharpest, and it's probably because not a lot of people have been cutting with that part of the blade. This part of the blade is the dullest, but if we're going by the sharpness of this part of the blade, I would say this comes reasonably sharp. The whole thing is currently sharp enough for fighting. You could do a lot of damage with this, but it isn't as razor sharp as maybe our ball of arms examples or our katanas. And honestly, you find that to be true in many antiques that you find. They're not super razor sharp, but if you try cutting fruit or anything else with them, they're gonna go right through. I'm gonna see how this will do against bottles because I've never cut with this type of edge before. And I don't know, I think it's gonna do well though. So why don't we try some cutting? Not all the way through. It went through the front. Have you noticed? And nothing on the back. That was actually very easy. You want to give it a try, Dalton? Edge alignment was a little off. Pez dispenser. There you go. That was clean. Nice. Yeah?
Even though it's a heavier saber, it feels as though it's cutting light.
Pez dispenser. Yeah, not enough force behind it. That's okay. That was soapy. Wow. Edge alignment was bad. He is bleeding though. Try a normal cut. A little bit of breaking. Off with his head. These are harder to cut, so I was wrong. That was way easier. So overall, what do I think of the Windlass Steelcrafts 1796 Light Cavalry Saber? Is it worth it for you to buy? Yes, it is. And the reason why is it is one of the closest replicas you can get to the real thing. And it comes relatively sharp. I think you can get it unsharpened or sharpened, depending on which site you get it on. And the edge is serviceable. It isn't not the best edge I've ever seen. And honestly, it's something that I wish Windlass would do with more of their swords. If they can find a way to get that single edge geometry on their blades, the value of their blades would go sky high, because we see other reproducers like LK Chen making a 1796, and the edge on his is impeccable. It is razor sharp out of the box and has a single edge geometry, and you could probably cut all day with it. If you're looking for something that's a little closer to a dueling style saber, I would say that this is probably not the saber for you because of how wide that blade is and the hatchet point and the point of balance. It is not going to feel anywhere near as lively in the hand as a later period saber. You can have these swords for about $350 to $375 depending on the website. I thought Cult of Athena sold this, but apparently it doesn't. Where can I find this sword, TJ? Medieval Collectibles. We don't have an affiliation with them at all. So go check out Medieval Collectibles. They have this sword for sale, and if you need to know more information about it, you can go to Windlass Steelcrafts and learn more about what their swords are made out of and how they're made. If you're looking for historical combat merch, we sell 4 different t-shirt styles on our website, and every t-shirt you buy helps me not have to eat ramen noodles. So you are supporting the channel, you are helping us make more videos every single day, and you get to look cool with our merch. And we love wearing it, our students love wearing it, we think you guys will like it too. That's all I got for you guys today. Bye.